In late November last year, the Ukrainian Parliament approved a budget for 2019 for the country's defence sector of about $3.69 billion, an 18% increase year on year. At first glance, this sum may seem a lot. But after 4 years of Russia's war, the cost of military equipment, housing, as well as defence sector reforms is increasing, meaning efficient spending is a key priority. In 2016, Transparency International established the Independent Defence Anti-Corruption Committee, known by the acronym NACO, aimed at promoting transparency and accountability. We recently sat down with retired Lieutenant General Michel Yakovleff, one of several distinguished NACO committee members. He spoke about the approaches to strengthen Ukrainian defence and security. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, you're working with the Independent Defence Anti-Corruption Committee, working to make defence spending more transparent in Ukraine. And one of the interesting things I found was that a lot of the defence spending is said to be secret because Ukraine is facing a Russian threat on its borders. How do you balance between the public interest, knowing how the public money is spent, and also defending the national security?
Thank you very much for that question, because it is at the heart of what we do at NACO. Balancing secrecy or confidentiality of military matters and transparency of the decision-making process and getting best value for money is something that the nations of NATO do quite well. I've spent 7 years in NATO, and in particular, NATO itself, the organization, has a procurement procedure that is very open and transparent to the NATO members. So it's in the confidential world of NATO, but it is based on a huge amount of transparency. This is to foster competition, so that at the end, we, the military, get the best product at the best price, in essence. And if you get the best product at the best price, then by definition, your military effectiveness is better than if you got crappy products at inflated price. And so you're just stronger, and therefore you win more battles and you lose less soldiers, less wounded, so it is of direct interest to everyone in the population, not only the political masters. Now, the argument of this is secret and so on is more often used, we believe, to cover shady deals or shoddy deals than actually because there is a secret that needs to be protected.
And when you say shoddy deals, you mean perhaps there's no competition in the tenders, perhaps someone has a relation who works at the
Exactly.
company?
It can be no competition, which can lead to overpricing, which can lead to a choice of a provider of lower value, and NACO has documented a very specific case of ambulances which were substandard and at inflated price. That has direct interest of people who are evacuated from the battlefield. So it's not a small matter. Yes, and you have all the other consequences in general terms of corruption, and also of credibility of the process, and therefore credibility of, in this case, a ministry, and credibility of a nation. And it also means a number of people may be open to blackmail, or a number of people may be operating for a foreign agency. So the NATO rule in general and in our nations is secrecy is the exception mode. The default mode is openness. What will be secret is very specific technical requirements that you're putting out. You start talking that with the firms once they're closer to the contract. But, for example, NATO is purchasing 5 billion euros worth of high-altitude drones for intelligence collection, in this case from an American firm. That tender has been open. A number of firms have had a look at it. There's been lots of discussions with them. The birds are well known, by the way. So the idea that everything has got to be secret, quite frankly, for me, from an outside world, and after 7 years in NATO, I can say that is completely bizarre.
Do you think, though, that this is because there isn't actually a war in any NATO member state? Do you think it would be different? Say, for example, we had some, say, foreign soldiers in a case turn up at the Arc de Triomphe in France, and the French government says, "We need help. What are we going to do?" Do you think then, if the French government were forced to intervene, then there would be more secrecy?
No. It's irrespective of the situation, because I'll take an example. In Afghanistan, it is a war. Now, it's not an existential war, and it's not NATO that is invaded, which is not the case here, of course. But even to purchase IT in Afghanistan, competitive bidding. To equip camps, protection material, competitive bidding. To build the runways, competitive bidding. It's with open tendering and so on. So no, secrecy has very little to do with whether we are in a war situation or not.
I think the work that NACO does is great. I've looked through the booklet, and they lay out some extensive plan and a lot of advisory measures to make the sector more transparent. But how do you perhaps persuade the officials who are actually involved in monitoring these tenders to actually change their ways?
Well, that's friendly pressure.
What about international pressure? Does that work?
Now, in the specific cases that we have documented, not very visibly. Now, NACO has been, as an organization, active for 2 years. It has produced 6 reports. 2 more are in the pipeline. So it takes time between documenting an issue, people becoming aware of the issue, and then people getting involved in the issue, and so on. And there are elections coming up, which means that the people who will get involved in the issue, many of them may change in any case.
Yes.
So, I mean, at the political level. At the administrative level, I suppose there will be some change too. So nothing happens overnight, and NACO does not pretend that things should happen overnight. I think what NACO is meeting is a gradual realization of the true relationship between military performance and efficiency on the one side, and transparency, openness in the procurement.
And has there been any evidence of this clear correlation between the two, between sort of how efficient the soldiers are on the ground?
Well, I'll take an example. After a NACO report on housing contracts, that is of a direct interest not necessarily for the war, but for the soldiers, Minister Poltorak cancelled 6 contracts because he was helped in his assessment by the report that said these were uncompetitive contracts, overpriced, and so on. Get value for money out of true competitive bidding. So NACO on a few issues is starting to be effective. But of course, NACO's approach is not to solve individual issues. NACO's objective is to help the system improve and attack the system of corruption, not the individuals. It's the system that we are concerned with.
What are your sort of 3 or 4 things that you would like to achieve then at NACO? What's your ambition here?
The ambition for NACO is to support the reform in general terms of military procurement and associated items like housing, real estate, and so on, within the defense community in Ukraine. When I say the defense community, there's a Ministry of Defense, but it also has dependents, active servants, men and women, retired, the wounded, the veterans, the civilian hires, the dependence in general. They are our main focus.
How much of this reform actually relies on the Defence Ministry itself? Is it also very political? So, say for example, with the housing, the housing law dates back to the Soviet era. Yes. So, how much work do you think is needed within the Defence Ministry itself, and actually how much relies on external factors?
For sure, it will depend, to start with, on political will from the highest level and a degree of supervision from Parliament. In all our nations, democracies, you have the executive branch doing things under control and supervision of the legislative. A general trend of what we observe in NACO is that the legislative branch is not able to do true supervision because of a culture of secrecy on the executive part, reluctance to produce figures, reports, to explain, and so on. So there is both sides that have to improve their play. We suggest that in a functional democracy, the executive branch should be more open about what it is doing and why, responding to queries. I mean, in America, you have subpoenas from Congress, end of the story.
I wanted to ask you about that. How does it work in America? Say, for example, I want to know about some weapons deals. Is it openly available on the internet, or do you have to apply, or... But there is a procedure.
Yes, there is a procedure in all our nations. In America, it's Congress exercising its privilege of supervision, using, if necessary, subpoena, meaning by law you've got to turn up and explain, bring the documents and explain. Now, whether Congress does it or not is an open debate in America these days. But right, in Great Britain is the Freedom of Information Act, which has been very effective in forcing the executive branch to bring out information.
So would you advise this? I mean, I don't even know actually if there is one in Ukraine.
I suppose, I don't know the Ukrainian constitution. I suppose it has a provision for that, and maybe it has not been, maybe there's a response such as, I know it's in the law, except that this is a state secret. So, for example, we are currently doing a study on the state defense order, which is more than a law, it's a mechanism, it's a concept and so on, which we, on preliminary analysis, we believe has been quite effective in withholding information that in most of our nations we would consider legitimate for Parliament. It may be a select committee of Parliament, meaning it's not necessarily on the internet, it's not necessarily information for everyone, but for example, in all our nations, in NATO, the secret services budget is secret in terms of general terms, but not to the select committee. So a number of members of Parliament have a very detailed look at what's going on, why, where, the money, and so on. That's, for example, in America, how the Iran-Contra scandal was exposed during the Reagan years, because Congress exercised its privilege of, or obligation, by the way, constitutional obligation of supervision of the executive. And what are you up to? And by the way, is that constitutional? Which is what it was not, that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So either the Ukrainian constitution has these provisions in place, but they are not really implemented, or it has not. And on our preliminary analysis of the state defense order, we are going to make recommendations to, in the view of helping that process of supervision. In general terms, the answer is that the Parliament has a true, Verkhovna Rada in this case, has a true understanding and practice of effective supervision. And therefore, the government, the executive branch being accountable, well, with a bit of luck, that will diminish, reduce opportunities for corruption or mismanagement, by the way.
Yeah,
and not necessarily corruption. Your initial point. It's not necessarily because there are potholes in the roads does not necessarily mean that it's corrupt. It may be an explanation, but mismanagement is another possibility.
But also a lot of work is probably needed by the civil society side as well, like the work that NACO is doing.
Yes.
Do you see much effort, much push from your side,
Yeah,
so to speak, to
yes.
expose?
From what I've seen, first of all, and this is something that's really commendable in Ukraine, civil society is very strong. That is really something that is endearing for a foreigner like me, discovering about Ukraine. I read about it, and now I'm starting to feel it, that as a result of two revolutions, or maybe the two revolutions were a result of, there is a strong civil society in Ukraine. And NACO is one of our objectives, by the way, is to help develop a community of interest within the civil society, within non-governmental organizations or other forms of associations, to foster that spirit. What NACO brings to the table in this case is, after 2 years of practice, true expertise in corruption in general terms, the Ministry of Defense construct, Ukaraboronprom and other, is beyond ministry. We bring expertise on that. And therefore, we see ourselves as valuable members of a coalition for which other organizations would have a look at, I don't know, Ministry of Agriculture or Industry or
yes,
other concerns. To help, to help empower supervision of the executive branch. That said, in any country, if you have a very strong parliament doing that, then the civilian organizations are helpful. They do advocacy and pressure and so on, but Parliament does it, and it has a constitutional remit for that, which the NGOs or NACO don't have. We don't have a constitutional remit to do that. We operate as far as we can, to a certain degree by acquiescence of our counterparts. Yes. And in this case, the ministry itself is pretty forthcoming. And we have contacts with the minister and at the presidential palace with the high-level advisors. They welcome our work. They attend our press conferences. They may agree or disagree. That's another point. But some of the information we've found did not come from defense sources. Some of it did.
Yes.
I wouldn't like to portray NACO as an adversarial mode with the Ministry of Defense. We are in collaborative mode with the occasional disagreement.
Yes.
And we would like them to react more to, let's say, to implement more of what we are suggesting, if they agree with it. But definitely it's more collaborative than adversarial. We find more people who agree with our aims and support them than true obstruction.
I have one last question for you, actually. As a foreigner, you could say, you come to Ukraine and you work within NACO itself. Is there anything that you've been surprised by, particularly since you've started working here?
That was my first thing. Civil society, a vibrant organizations and so on, with a free press, free debate, a large number of potential presidential candidates indicating a strong
willingness to change.
Willingness, yes. and this society wants to change. So there's a lot of energy there. A second point is that Ukraine is under attack. And the fact that even though it is under attack and invaded in part, and has preserved and even developed its democratic institutions, it's improving, it's working. There's true debate going on. that is a good lesson for many nations, because in one of your first questions there was the idea, what if at war then, you close everything, yes, and now you do. It's not, as far as I know, it's not happening here. So I think there are lessons here from Ukraine to the rest of the world. I may be under attack, but I will pursue democratic reform, whatsoever. In the end, I think it is that what will enable Ukraine to prevail. I think Ukraine will prevail. I don't know in how much time, but I think it will happen. Because what is happening to it, it's hurting, but it's improving the resilience of society. It's creating a stronger, more homogeneous society. And so I see the medium to long-term trend as, I think, I'm a believer in that respect, Ukraine will prevail by virtue of having, of the strength of society. Just like Switzerland, for example, prevailed during the Second World War when it was encircled by the Nazis, because it was a strong democracy with a strong resilience of society and a strong will to defend itself. They actually deterred Adolf Hitler when he was the master of Europe, of continental Europe. That is crazy to think of it. A small nation, just by virtue of the moral strength of the nation, that deterred Adolf Hitler. So I do think Ukraine is on that path. I find it very encouraging for the little I've seen.
Okay, well, let's leave it there. Thank you very much, Mr. Yakovleff.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.